Susan, why are you referring Lactalis to the ACCC?
For the last week, I've been speaking to dairy farmers, processors and retailers. I've been trawling through the numbers of the Queensland Dairy Audit Scheme and contracts, and I'm really concerned at the bullying practices of processors enforcing dairy farmers to sign contracts that are less than the cost of production. But what I'm really concerned about is that I've now discovered that Lactalis is including the drought levy funds into their offer to farmers. Now, I think it was always clear that the processors would offer dairy farmers a cost of production, a greater than cost of production price, and then consumers, through the drought levy, were supporting dairy farmers for these exorbitant prices that they're paying for feed and other costs during the drought. To find out that they are now offering a base price that's less than the cost of production and then using the drought levy to subsidise their own costs, I think is not in line with the spirit of the drought levy, and it is misrepresenting what consumers think is going on.
How does the statements made by the supermarkets at the dairy hearing sit with you in light of what you've discovered?
I'm really disappointed that despite all the ethical codes of conduct, all the buying practices, all the standards that the supermarkets hold themselves out to have are not being met. They do not have a genuine, clear audit process to satisfy themselves that the standard of conduct of their suppliers, of their processors, meets those standards. And in this case, their dairy farmers are not being paid a fair price, a price above the cost of production. And indeed, it means that dairy farmers are not paying themselves, they're not able to pay family members, and I don't think that's on. This is an industry that is being strangled by too low prices.
How would you describe what you believe you have found Lactalis doing, considering you've been speaking to farmers for so long?
I think this is unconscionable. Australians have been demanding that dairy farmers be paid properly over a very long period. This is something that they know is a problem, and it's why Australians were so keen to support the drought levy and to remove $1 a litre milk. So for us to now discover that this is still a problem that has not been solved, dairy farmers are still being paid less than the cost of production, I think is unconscionable, because there is no one in Australia, least of all retailers and processors, who aren't aware of the concerns that Australians have, but even worse, the real and genuine crisis that dairy farmers have right now.
So what can the ACCC do in this situation?
So the ACCC has already looked at the practices of Coles and whether or not they were passing on in full the drought levy payment as expected by Australian consumers. And there was a finding against Coles, and Coles is now paying $5.25 million through Norco back to their dairy farmers. So we have a very similar situation here where Australian consumers are in good faith paying this drought levy because they believe it is going back in full to dairy farmers. It was not used, it was not paid to subsidise processors' costs. That is up to processors to work out with their retailers. But dairy farmers need to be paid at the very least the full cost of their production, and I think everybody would agree that would need to include a little bit extra to allow them to reinvest in machinery, to reinvest in their animals, and also to pay themselves and their families.
You were recently in the Tablelands. What did you find out there when speaking to farmers?
The Tablelands farmers are no different to dairy farmers across the state in that they're in crisis. They need a serious increase in prices in order to survive. They tell me that they may not survive the next 6 months. They have a really difficult situation in that they only have one milk processor on the Tablelands, and that is Lion. Now, Lion is a very big business. It has all sorts of drinks, manufacturing and supply across the country, but their processing plant at Malanda is the only option for these 50-odd dairy farmers. So I would urge Lion to also look at their payments to dairy farmers and really ensure before Christmas that dairy farmers on the tablelands are receiving a fair price.
Would be the ideal outcome? Is it the processors suddenly adding 10 cents to a litre to what they're offering, or what do you believe is the best outcome?
The best outcome that we can have today is for processors and retailers to get together to agree these price increases that will be paid to dairy farmers before Christmas, to allow dairy farmers to have a fair price, to be able to pay their creditors, their payments in town, to be able to pay for the feed that they need to secure. We're in a drought, and so it is very hard to secure feed supplies into next year. And at the moment, dairy farmers just can't sign those contracts without knowing that they're going to get a price increase. This is exactly what the drought levy was designed for, was to give farmers some assistance while they get through these difficult times. So I'm urging processors and retailers, sit down, sort this out, because it needs to happen before Christmas, because we do not want dairy farmers leaving this industry. Queenslanders want to drink locally grown, locally produced milk, and the only way we can have that happen is keep our dairy farmers here.